Catherine of Aragon was no longer the object of the king's affection. She had managed to give birth only to a daughter, Mary, far from sufficient for Henry's dreams of dynasty. Before her marriage to Henry, she'd been married to his brother, Arthur, and widowed at his death. Now, Henry said, his marriage should be annulled. The Bible did not permit a man to marry his brother's widow, or so he claimed. This was the turning point. The Pope refused to countenance Henry's requests for a divorce. What could Henry do? The head of the church had refused to grant the annulment. There were no other options. But help came from an unexpected direction. In 1528, William Tyndale published a new book. And it was Anne Boleyn who saw how timely this publication was.
Over here, Brian, I'm sure you'll want to see this. This is Tyndale's Obedience of a Christian Man of 1528, a book which, in the end, reached the hands of Henry. And it was given to Henry by Anne Boleyn and appeared to be to Henry a very reassuring book.
He said, didn't he, that it was a book that all princes should read.
Now, what the significance of this book was for Henry was that it said that kings should be heads of the church. Exactly the message he wanted to hear.
It is a reassuring book because it still says that the king rules by divine right.
But it seems almost as if Tyndale for once was trying to curry favour with the king.
Perhaps Tyndale was becoming aware of political and religious realities. Perhaps in Antwerp he was learning that a little bit of deception could save your life, that little white lies might be worth telling, especially to the King of England. As for Henry, it seemed that progress with the divorce was finally being made. In 1529, the Pope granted an extraordinary concession. A court presided over by a papal representative would be allowed to take place in London.
Catherine used the occasion in the most theatrical way possible. This was her moment. She used the occasion to show injured innocence, to kneel before the king. She used the line, "Wherein have I offended thee?" It's what Jesus Christ said to his people before he was crucified. She knew what she was doing, and she seized that moment extraordinarily effectively.
The court was a masquerade, designed by the Pope simply to buy time and allow Catherine to state her case.
From that moment, Wolsey was finished, because he'd failed, and now that meant that there would be a new Lord Chancellor. Wolsey must go. Who could succeed him? Well, the cleverest lawyer in England was clearly Sir Thomas More. And so what more natural choice, with the embarrassing fact, however, that More did not approve of the annulment from Catherine.
It was the first time in 100 years that a layman had been appointed Lord Chancellor. More's residence was in Chelsea. He would daily make the journey downriver to attend the king's pleasure.
Now, More may have been a layman, but he was more committed to the Church of Rome than Cardinal Wolsey himself. He hadn't commented publicly upon the king's desire to separate himself from Catherine of Aragon, but the king knew that he found the scriptural arguments unconvincing. Now, he may have hoped to try and persuade him. He may have thought that he could impose his will upon him. He may have thought that More would have been dazzled by power, but he had quite mistaken his man.
I have told him that I can in no way adhere to His Grace's opinion on the marriage because it lies in flat defiance of God's holy laws. I am but one man, and a wretched man at that. But that is my judgment. The king excuses me and says I may amend hereafter. But God's laws are not to be amended.
If it was a question of amending, of changing God's laws, then perhaps a Protestant would be more willing. William Tyndale, exiled in Antwerp, was by now the most influential English Protestant. What did he think of the divorce? What would he make of this new opportunity to please the king's grace? He made his thoughts known in the Practice of Prelates, published in 1530.
Tyndale was not a man who cared about politics. He cared about principles. which meant that he told the king what he thought the king ought to hear, not what the king wanted to hear. So in the practice of prelates, for instance, he made it quite clear that he disapproved of what Henry was doing.
Henry was enraged. Tyndale was out of favour. His unwise intervention in the matter of the king's divorce showed him for what he was. He was a linguistic genius, a hero, and a political simpleton. As for Thomas More, as Chancellor, it was at last his responsibility to decide the suitable punishment for a heretic. It was the end for Wolsey's liberal policies. More felt that this mission was divinely appointed. Many of the heretics were brought to Chelsea, to More's own house, and personally interrogated by More himself. Now heretics would burn. More would stop this Protestant rot.
Master Moore, you were a bloody Christian cat. You would cut a man's throat for the sake of a witticism. You were no more than a cockney wanton who in the shade of hypocritical holiness hoards his king's gold.
You must watch your mouth, Master Tyndale, else you will go straight from the short fire to the fire everlasting. You kissed the arse of Luther, the cacodemon, the shit devil. You too will be covered in shit. Look, my fingers are smeared with shit when I try to clean your filthy mouth. Potista, asinus improbe mendax!
More was now free to pursue and punish heretics, but he had not accepted the divorce. The king turned to Thomas Cromwell, an ambitious member of the royal entourage. Cromwell favoured the Protestant cause. He favoured the divorce. He favoured an end to any relationship with Rome. Cromwell knew better than Henry that an English church would need an English Bible, and he sent an agent, Stephen Vaughan, to Antwerp to persuade Tyndale to return home. Tyndale met him in a field outside the city.
So this would be the first time since he left England in 1524 that Tyndale had broken cover.
Yes, these fields, I suspect, were the drying fields. So you should imagine yard upon yard upon yard of cloth. Between those, you can walk back and forth without being seen.
So he could put his head round the sheet and make sure Vaughan
Yes.
hadn't brought anybody else with him.
Exactly.
So Henry seems to be making Tyndale an offer he can't refuse. He's saying, come in from the cold, come home, all is forgiven. Why did Tyndale turn that down?
This was a time of hide and seek, looking whom you would trust, whom you wouldn't. Tyndale didn't take Henry's word for granted.